Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Jeff Chan. Jeff is VP of Technology over at Mox5. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, Pete. How's it going? Nice. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, thanks for being here, and obviously good to catch up with you. We've known each other a long time, but for, I guess, those that don't know, could you give our audience a little background on your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I can go ahead and start with how I first got into the cybersecurity space. Right out of college, started working in a security company doing risk assessments and pen tests and so on. Little did I know that was going to be a very passionate sort of skill and opportunity that I had. And as a result, I went and pursued my master's in security informatics in Baltimore. And from there on, I moved over to a couple different firms, Mandiant being one of those, focusing in digital forensics and incident response, and then a couple other firms as well, including Rapid7 and Crypsys, doing pretty much the same exact thing, digital forensics and incident response, helping organizations from small mom and pop shops to large Fortune 50, Fortune 100 organizations recover from these incidents and understand what happened. After that, I went and pivoted over to more of an internal security role at Hewlett-Packard Inc., so HP Inc., so the ones that make computers, kind of building the threat hunting team and the advanced threat pursuit team is what we called it, being able to take all the different tools that we have, automated, and ultimately resulting in less alerts that our team would have to deal with so that we can focus on the big picture items and those that probably require more of our attention. After that, one of the founders at Mox5 reached out to me and said, hey, there's this great opportunity to build something awesome at Mox5, change the industry in a way. And for me, it was a no-brainer. Ended up moving at Mox5, where I became a technical advisor, helping organizations as well deal with incidents, both from a forensics and recovery standpoint. And now I've kind of pivoted into a different role, which is more a technology-oriented role where I focus on building the platform that we've built in-house that essentially acts as a incident management platform to smooth and also elevate the communications across an incident. Things get pretty hectic when it comes to an incident. Our platform attempts to make sure that we can streamline and be the source of truth at the end of the day and make sure that everybody has the right communication at the right point in time.
Very cool. So obviously you've had a variety of experience in the industry between consulting, in-house, building teams, and all of that experience. Obviously, we talk a lot about the talent gap on the show. Do you view the talent gap per se as a real thing? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
I do think that the talent gap is actually really real. I think with the evolving landscape, there's new threats, new sorts of threat actors out there, especially with ransomware, right? You're dealing with newer variants, older variants, rebranded variants, and with the ever-growing technologies, with now you've got machine learning, artificial intelligence. One of the recent issues when you're looking at deepfake, right? You have these technologies that cybersecurity folks may not be exposed to, then now they have to learn and catch up, right? And it's almost like a catch-up game because our technologists, those that are in let's just say the computer science realm, and they start developing new technologies and so on, while it's great, security also has to catch up with that, right? So as a result, there's this gap in between where you kind of have to fill with either the existing people that are in here or with the newer generation that's ultimately learning and catching up to that. And there's so many different pieces to security. You've got the forensics aspect of it. You can be a SOC analyst. You can also be a pen tester, which is more of the proactive side. And then now you're introducing new variants to it or variables to it when you're looking at cloud security, identity access management. There's a plethora of different expertise in each of those areas that really require a ton of people, that we require a ton of people in this industry to kind of level up to get to that level. And when you're looking at organizations that are trying to find that talent, they usually don't want to find somebody that may not have that experience. They want somebody that has 5, 10, 15 years of experience with, obviously it's completely fair, it's understandable, but that creates that talent gap. We aren't able to foster the younger talent, the new generation to be able to get to that stage where yes, you can be that main person that can run through whatever expertise you guys need, whether it be IAM, whether it be forensics, pen testing, you have it. And then that results in this sort of competitive job market at the end of the day, where we want the best of the best. We want to hire the best folks to fit this role, thus leading to this talent gap that we see today.
Yeah, I think it's basically just a giant poach fest. Everybody wants to hire the same senior people that have been doing it forever. And very few companies or hiring managers have the desire or maybe the budget or the time horizon to build their own talent. I think it's the biggest existential problem that the industry is facing right now, especially as, like you mentioned, you did some automation. If you're figuring out how to triage alerts without the use of a tier 1 SOC analyst, that avenue for people to get their feet wet in the field and basically start to build some experience and move towards a senior role. If that doesn't exist anymore, where do they go? So, I've talked about this before. Where do you see, I guess, the future being for people entering the field? What entry points are there going to be in the field? And how can we create more of those?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it, right? I mean, on one side, you have those that are trying to look for those opportunities. And for those candidates, I would just say, focus on learning the skills that you're most interested in. Focus on your strengths. If you're good at forensics, double down on that and just be really good at what you do, and take more, certificates and take courses that can help you with really shaping your forensics mindset, for lack of a better term, so that you can be seen as that expert, even though you may not have that hands-on experience. So you've got that one aspect of it. But then at the same time, as hiring managers, we also have to do a better job in terms of being comfortable with not finding the perfect talent for that role or the perfect person for that role, but more so identifying the person that has enough passion and will at the end of the day. There's this skills versus wills sort of matrix where, yes, you may find talent that have the right skill set. They might be the best, but if they don't have the will for it or the hunger and the desire to be the best and work in a really healthy environment, it makes it tough for that individual to succeed within that organization. So oftentimes people look at it from a hiring manager perspective as, does this person have all these certs? Does this person have all the different requirements, the 10 plus years experience? But some of the other elements behind it, which is the will behind it, may not be there, and resulting in candidates that may not fit well. And now those candidates have to look for a different opportunity and so on. So it's a balance between both sides of the world.
Yeah, I think we have this giant mismatch essentially where there's a ton of people looking for entry level or junior jobs. And, a lot of people would make the argument no such thing as an entry level security job, obviously. But then, we just don't have the jobs. On the other hand, at the senior level, there never seems to be enough of those folks, the senior individual contributors, essentially. I see it kind of like just like a bell curve, like anything else, where the majority of the demand for talent is at the top of the bell curve, and then demand decreases on either side of that, down to the executive level on the right-hand side of the distribution, and then down to the entry level on the left-hand side of the distribution. So, but I think, we need to be focusing more as an industry on getting more of those people to that level, like, where all the demand is. They don't just appear out of thin air. They have to be developed. Have you ever worked at an organization that was able to build a pipeline of junior folks and grow them so that they had, over time, a good pipeline of mid-level folks going into seniors over time?
100%. At HP, as we were trying to build a team, we used to outsource the SOC to a third-party vendor to help us doing the analysis and so on. But at the end of the day, we kind of realized, okay, there's this incredible opportunity for us to grow the team by not only hiring folks that are a little bit more junior, but allows us to be able to coach them and mentor them, and not only just get more junior folks to be part of the team, but you enable the senior folks of the team to mentor them and coach them. It gives them a different sets of skills, right? When you look at, usually when I see a career progression, folks typically think of it as, you need to learn, you start from zero and now you learn 100 things. Like that's the general goal. And you have to be extremely technical. But I think at the end of the day, there's this balance of being technical, but then learning these interpersonal skills where you can become more of a manager, a mentor, a leader. And those are the elements that are oftentimes put on the back burner, so to speak, which in a way, a lot of those security folks that are at that senior level really need or are looking for, right? And we were lucky enough to be able to get a bunch of folks that started at a junior level, giving all of us, the senior folks, the ability to be able to coach and mentor them and guide them through kind of the process that we went through throughout our entire careers, right? And one of the things that I wanted to kind of highlight, you were mentioning earlier about the different opportunities for how can we get the junior folks to, how to get these sorts of opportunities. I think one of the other things that these, younger or newer generation can do is if you aren't exposed in, anything cyber related and you want to really get into it, I would say use the existing organization that you're in and try to pivot into that security role. You may not have the right expertise, but at least you start getting some of that exposure, which is extremely important. So you may not be able to get that entry-level job or what have you that you're looking for from a security standpoint, because it might be tough due to a lack of experience and so on. But you may be able to pivot at least internally to help you with that, jump and get you a kickstart there.
Yeah, and that's come up before. If there's anything you can do to kind of shadow the security team with your organization or
right.
Even IT team. But then, I think a lot of folks are working just regular retail jobs or whatever while they're maybe going through school or getting certifications and trying to break into security. And they may not necessarily have that type of team, at their current organization where they work. In which case, I think it can be more difficult for those folks to tap into that talent. Obviously, not their own organization; they're going to have to find it elsewhere. In which case, I have a bunch of resources I'll send people, Discord channels and LinkedIn. There's just so many places that you can hang out where security people hang out these days. I think there's so many people on all of these or in all of these avenues. I'll look at the Discord channels that I'm a part of, and there's just post after post after post of people in the mentor-mentee section. There's so much of this stuff going on, but I'm just not seeing the jobs there. But obviously, organizations have specific needs. They can't always hire somebody junior as much as perhaps they would like to. So I think there's certain skill sets that are always going to be a little bit short. There are some that ebb and flow, like, for instance, DFIR, I think, is a good example. I'd say a year ago, demand was super flat. And, the ransomware engagements had slowed down due to, I guess, the war in Ukraine. And now it's peaking again. And then everybody's clamoring for the same people that were laid off not long ago. And that's just the nature of, the market, I guess. But then there's other things like, say cloud security, DevSecOps, application security. I think there's always, or at least for foreseeable future, there's going to be a shortage of those good senior folks. Whereas,
right.
GRC, I've noticed, has kind of hiring for that discipline or subdiscipline of security has fallen off a cliff. Seems to be coming back a little bit. But then we also have, the big tech layoffs. It's a very strange, I guess, talent market right now. I will say that. Have you noticed any of the impacts from, I guess, the layoffs or the proliferation of candidates, or on the other side, the increased demand for, say, DFIR talent?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially nowadays, and you hit it right there in the head, right? With obviously last year and the years before, due to the conflict and due to the war and so on, that leads to this kind of, I wouldn't say shortage, but there's really no need to hire more forensics folks because there's not a lot of opportunities out there. There's not a lot of cases going on. So there's no need, right? There's no demand. But now with things kind of picking back up again, I think it gets to a point where, okay, we need to start hiring more and more. And that's where, again, to your point earlier, the talent gap arises where, yes, we have an insane number of cases. We just want to hire folks that are extremely talented and are the best of the best, the cream of the crop sort of forensics folks. But at the end of the day, this creates this creates this sort of, um, I wouldn't say rivalry, but in a way, everybody's kind of fighting for that same individual at the end of the day. Oh, no, you come to our consulting firm or go to this other consulting firm and so on. And it becomes very challenging to find the right talent. And to your point earlier, it's tough to find and source younger talents or folks that are really good at what they do, just they don't have that opportunity because we're probably looking at the wrong, job rec or the wrong people for it. And I wouldn't say wrong in the sense that they're not qualified for it. I would just say there are other talented people that are equally as good that we just oftentimes overlook. So.
Yeah, and I'm a big proponent in general of just hiring for potential. Obviously,
Correct.
You can't hire purely for potential. Somebody has to have a baseline level of skill for the job that they're being considered for.
Exactly.
Especially in, say, DFIR, I've heard over the years the term investigative mindset, how important that is to a forensics person. I'm curious what role that plays in hiring in your experience, and if you could kind of qualify what that term actually means and how you identify that in, say, a candidate.
That's a great question. I think it all boils down to somebody being analytical and having that hunger and desire to learn and the curiosity at the end of the day to figure out, okay, what happened and how did the threat actors get in, understanding the why. I've recently heard from another colleague in the past where they shared with me one of the most important things when it comes to finding a new opportunity, just in general, the work ethic, you should always ask yourself why 5 times. So why is this case and why and why and why? That just drives that sort of innate curiosity within you to be able to, do whatever it is that you want to do and do it well, right? Instead of just doing what is right in front of you, try to discover more and uncover the pieces behind the story. So taking it from a forensic standpoint, sure, you may find a little forensic artifact that tells you a part of the story, but why don't you start digging a little bit more and finding deeper and going deeper and deeper and deeper and getting to the root cause? And I think oftentimes that's what people are looking for when it comes to the forensics roles, right? Is somebody that has that curiosity of not just stopping at, the first stop sign, but continuing and moving forward and see how far can you go down that rabbit hole, right? Within the proper constraints, you don't want to kind of dig in too deep and not being able to get out, but understanding, how far down the rabbit hole you should go, right? And I think when it comes to hiring, I totally agree with you. It comes to a point where you need to find people that have the right potential. They may not have all the bells and whistles when it comes to certificates or the education and so on. And I get it. There's some people organizations that might be turned off by that factor of it, and that's okay. But you really need to get to see the individuals based on their talent and, how much they know. Let's say, for example, from a forensics perspective, do they know the baseline minimum requirements? But do they have the hunger and desire to actually go through with it, that, innate curiosity that comes within you? I think that is far more important than just having, everything that's perfect on a piece of paper, right? So
it's so interesting. It seems like most hiring managers I talk to, when they describe their ideal candidate or what they look for in somebody, most often the first thing they talk about is intangibles. It's not actually the technical requirements that actually go on the job description. It's like You have to put something there, obviously, like they have to know some sort of tooling or some set of tooling, like know some sort of SIM, and then that knowledge translates to a different type of SIM, but we often default, I think, to those things that we can tangibly describe and that somebody might be able to put on a resume. But if the majority of what you're hiring for isn't stuff that's on the resume, it can be, I guess, kind of inefficient if you're looking for things that aren't ever going to be on the resume. And it becomes an exercise of just talking to as many people as you can. So how do you translate those intangibles to, say, a recruiter who's going out there to find somebody? How do you, I guess, educate them as to, hey, this is what I'm looking for from an intangible standpoint, and here's how you can identify that sort of thing in somebody that you don't already know, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have 2 main components, at least for me, that I think, or 3, that I find without a doubt probably the most important characteristic that you need to find within an individual, which is someone that's analytical, someone that's a good communicator, and someone that's a good leader. So those are the three main components that I personally look for in the next person that we're trying to have, come join our team, right? And when it comes to that, I think a lot of the questions that our hiring team can start asking during those first few rounds, it can lead us to ascertain whether this person is a good communicator, whether this person has this innate ability to be a leader and commanding the room, not overpowering the room, but commanding the room in a right way, and somebody that's analytical and somebody that thinks through it. When we go through this hiring process, I usually see it as multiple rounds. It's a journey at the end of the day. But oftentimes people see it as a round is individual from one another, where you get to see, okay, great, this technical component, we're going to ask everything forensics, you either pass or you don't pass. Then you have this other round, which is coding. Do you pass or don't pass? But you take all those elements separate from one another. And I think that the interview process is really a journey. It's almost as if, look, even when you're not interviewing, you're also interviewing for the role. The behaviors, how do you respond to individuals? How do you follow up from an email and saying, hey, it was great chatting with you. I've thought about some of the questions in our interview. Here's my additional response. Those are the little things that I'm looking for personally in a candidate that shows that sort of hunger and desire, because it's the skills that, yes, you can ace an exam, but can you ace that whole, interview journey together with us? Because that will really tell you how that individual would interact with the team at the end of the day. So
that's so interesting. You mentioned the interview process as a journey. I think most people default to treating it just like you said, where each interview is just kind of its own thing, and it's a knockout. Basically, either you pass or you don't pass. When, if you maybe had a couple more rounds with that person, maybe they had other characteristics that would be more important to your team than the one area where they were lacking. I think we do it the way we do it generally because it's just a time issue. If you have, say, 10 candidates and you're able to winnow down the field to, say, 2 by knocking 8 people out in the first round, to get to the best people as soon as humanly possible, it saves people a bunch of time. But I suppose the downside to that would be that you are possibly eliminating people that could otherwise be a fit. How can you, I guess in your experience, are you then doing like a full interview process with every single candidate, or do you still narrow down, per round?
That's a great question. We try to narrow it per round, and it sounds a little bit counterintuitive with what I just mentioned, but the reality of it is we approach it differently, where instead of starting with the technical rounds, we start with the non-technical rounds first, understanding a little bit more about the individual. How do you conduct yourself across on a call or a meeting with a bunch of team members? Do you have the communication skills, the leadership skills, the all those interpersonal skills that are extremely important? But then also looking at the resume, right? At the end of the day, to your point, you kind of have to have this minimum requirement. Do you understand forensics? Do you understand these components? Let's just use forensics as an example. If you have those on your resume, there are some things that I'll probably ask during this first few questions, first few rounds, to make sure that you have some of that knowledge before moving forward. But at the end of the day, I think what I value most is, are you a leader? Are you a good communicator? Are you a great analytical person that can solve these problems? And I think that is oftentimes overlooked or hold off until the last round, or maybe even sometimes overlooked, where people don't think about it that way. They just say, okay, I want to find the person that knows every single technical answer. And if they do, there's the right person, but they cannot have a conversation with a CISO or something along those lines. So we usually see it the reverse. Try to do the non-technical first and then get to the technical stages later. Because I think at the end of the day, with this day and age, people can Google pretty much everything. Yes, you may not know the answer, but can you get to the answer at the end of the day? And I think that's the biggest key piece. So.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned analytical ability so much. I can definitely see where that makes sense for a forensics role. And you could say the same thing for, say, a pen tester role, which is, the opposite side of the coin. Essentially, it's offensive versus defensive, but you still have to be able to think outside the box and basically solve the puzzle. And you have to have that drive to want to solve that puzzle. how do you determine analytical ability or bent? That would seem like something that's kind of difficult to assess. Like, I know myself I'm analytical just because I know myself pretty well, but I feel like to be an interviewer, that would be a pretty hard thing to assess in somebody. Like, is it like a scenario based thing that you do, or how do you determine?
Yep. It's usually scenario based. And I think with scenario based, and like I said, you may not have the experience, but can you bring in that sort of analytical mindset to the playing field, right? I would see it as a game where you're giving this question, you're in a game, try to figure out what happened. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just how you approach it. So usually what we would do is, and this is something that we started instituting a couple of months ago, which is, giving the candidates a take-home exam, quote unquote, where it's more of, here you go, explain me how you would solve this XYZ situation and how you would navigate it in your own eyes. And I think that that's a great way to not only look at the candidates that fit well for your team, but then also understand, do they have the minimum level requirements? How can we poke on their brain a little bit more when we give them a little bit more time to think about their answers and so on, and then digest it. We'll read it. We'll understand what they actually said in terms of, how they approach this problem and how did they solve it. That'll give us a good insight into how analytical they are and how, do they have that curiosity at the end of the day to figure out what happened, and how to be able to do certain things.
Awesome. And you mentioned communication skills and leadership too. I would imagine all those things plus analytical ability would apply to basically any role that you're looking to fill, with, obviously some exceptions. I would imagine, for instance, the communication skills might have a little bit less of a level of importance hiring for internal roles, non-consulting, non-client facing. Was that your experience? Like, would you ever hire somebody that wasn't necessarily an amazing communicator, but was exceptional technically, as long as they had like the right attitude, I guess?
Yeah, I think having the right attitude is important, but I do think that communication is still really important, even if it's internal, right? Because oftentimes there are situations where you would encounter, and I've seen clients that have, experienced this as well, which is, they have folks that are security analysts or SOC analysts, and they just don't communicate anything. They see something bad, but they'll just say, you know what, I'm going to skip it. I'm going to move to something different. I don't think this is worth asking the question, or I don't think we should, bring this up to the larger team or the executive team or what have you. And I think that's where there's a lot of gaps, right? In security, that's how some of these breaches happen, where people just shrug it off and kind of put it on the side. So I do think that when it comes to internal roles, it's important to have communication. It's great skills in explaining, why do you think this is bad, or why did you raise this flag up? And granted, that could lead to more noise or unwanted noise. But in security, I think it's better to be, there's a saying, the paranoid survive or strive, or whatever that the phrase is. But ultimately is those that are more paranoid, I think at the end of the day will survive. And when it comes to security, oftentimes it's better to be paranoid and not have to deal with $1 million, $2 million loss when it comes to figuring out the forensics, the recovery, and getting your company back online. So,
yeah, it's interesting. That makes me think of personality traits. I don't know if you study much about human psychology, but it's a kind of a personal interest of mine. And you say, the paranoid survive in security. That would make sense if you're sensitive to threats. If that's kind of your default to always be looking for threats. That sounds exactly to me like neuroticism. If you have a neurotic personality component to it and you're high in trait neuroticism, you're probably more sensitive to threats than somebody who's low in trait neuroticism. Downside of that, obviously, is you're miserable a lot of the time, but it might make you better at detecting those threats. Are there other, I guess, like personality traits that you generally look for in hiring somebody, or does that factor in at all?
I think that does factor in at all, but I think, like I said, the biggest ones are going to be, somebody that's extremely analytical. I think somebody that likes to solve the problems and figure out the why behind things, the why. And it's just that innate curiosity. If you have that curiosity, that means you're passionate about something. If you don't have that curiosity, there's no driving factor. I don't see that energy. from within you. And I think that oftentimes with security, especially if you're dealing with whether it be an internal or external role, like a consultant or internal security sort of role, I think at the end of the day, you kind of have to have that spark to help you guide you through it. When you do a ton of consulting, you may end up working 60, 80 hours or so, in some cases a week. And that can be daunting. That can be scary to some people. But if you have that sort of passion and that, happiness and desire to say, yes, this is what I want to do, it's tough for this 1 to 2 weeks or so, but then we'll kind of taper it down and control it and regulate it. But if you have that fuel and passion, it can beat a 60-hour week or an 80-hour week in some cases, right? And same thing internally, when there's probably not a lot of things going on, not a lot of incidents, which is great, don't get me wrong. I think at the end of the day, you kind of have to figure out your curiosity on, maybe let me start digging in a different set of computer systems, or let me take a look at cloud and learn a little bit more about cloud security, and be curious about not just staying in the world that you're in, but then also expanding across different domains too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's some parallels in analytical ability between being a security professional and being a good recruiter. I've never really been able to put my finger on it, but I think one of the things that makes me a good recruiter is I am analytical and I do dig deeper. I think the best recruiters and making the best long-term career matches are always asking a lot of whys, a lot of motivational sort of things that they're looking to uncover. And I've trained a couple of recruiters now, and I've had to really teach them, you really can't take the first answer that somebody gives you as their answer. You have to dig past that surface and have sort of the emotional intelligence to know when maybe there's something else there that you haven't quite uncovered yet, and when to dig deeper in, and when to feel like you've kind of hit the bottom where, that's probably the actual truth. And that can be so hard to figure out if you're not wired that way. So I think some people are just kind of naturally wired that way, and some folks aren't. But I think to go back to the motivational piece, I think that's so important in making long-term career matches. And I think oftentimes in the interview process, that's one of those things that's overlooked. It's like, okay, well, is this person in the salary band? Can they do the job? Do we like that person? All right, great, let's hire them. We don't always necessarily as an industry focus enough, I think, on the motivators of somebody. And I hear, kind of like you said, often about how important it is for somebody to have passion for security. And that's what's going to kind of get them through the tough times and the long weeks and stuff like that. Do you think, and I've asked previous guests this, because I think it's a common point of contention, really, that I don't think everybody's motivated by the same things. I don't think everybody that's in security necessarily has a true passion for security. For some people, I think it may be a means to an end. Maybe their true passion or their motivator is their family. And it's their family that drives them to work long hours and put in the time and make the money and all that good stuff. Do you think that there's a different type of motivator other than a passion for security that might be sufficient to make somebody an effective security professional over time and stick with it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's a tough one because I personally would say that person really has to be motivated and fueled by security. I do think that obviously from family aspect of things, totally get it, right? If you love your partner, your kids, and so on, that's also important. You may be fueled by those energy forces, but if you're not happy working in this sort of environment and you just feel like you're just working just because you need to make ends meet, I think it's tough to continue, right? And it's one of those factors that can keep pulling you down. I always like to have these sorts of candid conversations because at the end of the day, if it doesn't work for you and you don't think that security is the role for you, there's always different areas that you can pivot. And sure, it could still be within the security realm, but maybe you don't have to do incident response. Maybe you can pivot to GRC if that's what you're more interested in, or doing something that is probably not in the front lines, quote unquote, that will require more of your time so you can spend more time with the family. I think those are important elements because I totally understand, like, there's forces like your family that will want to keep you driving and moving forward. I would say you said it, right? It's family. So focus on your family, and family is number one thing. So can you find a role still within security, if that's what you're interested, that allows you to not just be focused in security and have fun with it, but then also spend time with your family and being able to do that. So
makes sense. So you would kind of see a distinction then between different types of security roles and the types of demands that they make on somebody, and
yes.
what needs to drive you to do a certain role. Like I would imagine to be a CISO, you have to be very driven by security itself as well. And you have to enjoy the challenge of constantly fighting for budget and headcount, and not mind working with other executives. And there's certain aspects that are more likely to ensure success. One thing I hear often these days is it seems like a lot of security teams are trying to do more with less. There's less budget. There's less headcount. CISOs are super stressed right now. They're not getting the buy-in from the board that they need to get what they need to get done. At the same time, their responsibility is increased. They're basically the chief fall guy or gal, and their compensation isn't increasing. I keep hearing this, and I heard some statistic recently where they said like 75% of CISOs are unhappy in their role, which to me is crazy. And I would imagine, burnout factors into that quite a bit, as I'm sure it does in DFIR as well. Have you, I guess, developed any strategies over the years to head off at the past burnout, or to address it, if it does happen?
Yeah, 100%. I think oftentimes people overlook at this, but part of the culture that you build is extremely important. Culture, I think, is really what allows you to go through the struggles from time to time and deal with it in a much better way, and also have the support from your team in a much better way, right? If you are able to grow a team and lead a team that can support you and trust you, you guys have an open line of communication across the board, you're able to go through these tough times regardless of whatever the issue is, right? Let's say we're not able to get the budget, we're not able to get additional folks to support the team, and additional SOC analysts or so on to cover the night shifts or the weekend shifts and so on. I think at the end of the day, when you have a team that can support you and you build that sort of trust within your group, you can fight off pretty much anything that you need. And granted, don't get me wrong, I still do think that CISOs can use more budget and more resources to support their teams. I think organizations have to do a little bit better, right? It's, you want to be able to take care of your folks because, yes, they are burning out. And in some cases, they're, putting in the 60, 80-hour weeks for multiple consecutive weeks. How do you support them, right? And sometimes support really comes from, let me get you the additional budget that you need for this additional tool that's going to help you do your job more efficient, or allow you to not be too worried or stressed about all the other things that you're kind of cooking at the same time. So,
do you think there's a phenomenon, say in DFIR, where you can only be on call and responding to breaches for so long before inevitably you burn out? Or do you think some people can kind of do it forever and be all right?
Oof. I think that there's some people that are wired to be able to do it forever. Personally, for me, I'll give you my example. It comes and goes. There are times where I just say, you know what, let me hop on a call at 12 at night, 1 a.m, because it's just how I'm wired. But sometimes I'm like, I'd rather go spend time with the family in some cases, right? And there's this sort of, you kind of have to do this assessment of yourself and see what sort of energy do you have and that passion that you have. I do think that how we manage the on-call weekends or nights and so on, it could be way, way, way better. I don't think that there is a solution there yet. And candidly, I've seen so many different sorts of styles in terms of how people operate, where obviously you have folks in different countries that support different time zones, or you have shifts where it's, Monday through Thursday, and then from Wednesday through Sunday or something along those lines to kind of provide that full coverage. But candidly, at the end of the day, I think it'll still lead to burnout. And it's just a matter of, if you're wired that way to be able to continue doing this for the rest of your life. So
yeah, I mean, I would imagine at some point there's some things that you can do, like maybe say studying stoicism and meditating or something like that to keep yourself more sane. But like you said, I think some people are just wired that way, just like some people are more wired to want to be executives and work 80-hour weeks or run law firms, things like that. Not everybody is wired that way. Is that ever something that you look for or that you have looked for in hiring for DFIR, or is that just kind of a nice byproduct if you find somebody with investigative mindset, analytical ability, communication skills, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I think it's a nice byproduct. I think at the end of the day, we're all humans, right? And we all deserve a break from time to time. And we also, as leaders, need to figure out how to be able to manage our team and be able to make sure that they're not burning themselves out. Not more because of, hey, this person, yes, they like working, we should keep giving this person more work. It doesn't really work that way. You kind of have to manage and balance the individual so that from a health perspective, they're not ruining themselves. And sometimes they probably don't even think of that, right? They skip lunch or skip dinner. And I think as leaders, we have to help coach them in not just the technical aspects of it, but also the interpersonal aspects of it, their personal aspects of it, right? Where, yes, they need to put in their time. You love working, appreciate it, love it, man. But go take a break. Like, go get something to eat. I'll cover for you. But make sure that you kind of have that balance at the end of the day. And it's great to have individuals that are wired that way. But it's also a matter of, the manager or the leader to be able to manage those expectations so it doesn't go too overboard. So,
are there any specific, systems or ways that you've managed to deal with that over the years to encourage people to take some time for themselves and not burn themselves out? Like I'm thinking of, mandatory policies where it's mandatory to take your PTO, for instance, or, if you're on call for X, Y, and Z number of days, then you automatically get a day off, that sort of thing. Have you implemented anything like that over the years that has worked pretty well?
Yeah, our team has implemented this sort of workflow where if over the weekend you do end up working, let's say, a client comes in and says they need support on a Saturday or a Sunday, and you do end up working long hours on those days, the next week, you should take an additional day off, whether it be on a Friday or Monday or whenever you want to take it, just take the day off. At the end of the day, you need to recharge, because if you think of it this way, if you're working that weekend, not only have you worked the weekend before, but you're also working the week after that weekend, right? So it's almost 14 days of consecutive work every single day. That is not sustainable. At the end of the day, you need to find some time to give yourself a breather. So as a result, as leaders, we have to be more cognizant of that. And we have to take a look at how our team is performing and dealing with certain situations. Do we notice that they're a little bit different? Do we notice that they haven't, as silly as it may sound, have they showered or have they not eaten, or do they seem jittery or what have you? Have they, threw in comments where they highlight, oh, I'm on my 20th cup of coffee or something along those lines? Those are key indicators to, just kind of tell our team, hey, take a break. I'll jump in and support you. And I think as leaders, we have to do that a little bit more, which is us supporting in the front lines. You can't just tell somebody else to fill in. You do it yourself. And I think that's a true representation of what really needs to happen as a leader. So,
yeah, that's great. Some of my favorite hiring managers over the years take that tact. They're servant leaders. They're not just shouting from on high, hey, I need you to do this. They're not authoritarians. They're very much there in the trenches with their team. And again, I think some people are just wired that way. They have a true passion for leading people and caring about people. And maybe they have a higher emotional intelligence. Speaking of which, I guess EQ, emotional intelligence, is that something that you just have or you don't? Or do you think that sort of thing can be trained?
I think it can be trained. It's kind of understanding the cues at the end of the day. You have to be aware of your situation and surroundings, I would say, in order to have good EQ. Because at the end of the day, like I said, for example, if somebody's burning out, there's going to be subtle comments around, their behavior, mannerisms, or what have you. They don't take care of themselves. They don't go have lunch. They'll say, oh, I skipped lunch, or it's the fourth day that I've skipped lunch again. Or something along those lines. Like, those are the little cues that you can start paying attention to bolster your EQ. I do think that obviously, naturally, there's going to be people that have a higher EQ than others, and that's normal. But there are ways that you can at least start identifying these sorts of trends or behaviors or patterns that can help you be better at identifying these situations. So.
Yeah, I would imagine it helps to be analytical too. You analyze people's emotions and those little details that maybe not everybody picks up on. So yeah, I think all of those traits kind of go hand in hand. Obviously you're very involved with you've been very involved with hiring over the years. You have a lot of thoughts on this stuff. Are there any, I guess, specific challenges that you've encountered over the years? I mean, we kind of talked about consulting and DFIR and the pace. But when it comes to the actual hiring or recruiting process, are there any recurring themes that you've encountered over the years that keep showing up in your experience?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my earlier comment on, I think the passion, the curiosity, that sort of analytical mindset sometimes gets overlooked. And I think both the hiring manager and the HR team or the recruiting team, they have to work really close to one another, so that the hiring manager can translate efficiently what the requirements are for that role outside of the technical constraints, right? Don't limit yourself to just that. Don't set the bar extremely too high, because then you're going to weed people out that would otherwise be good, perfect fit for the culture, perfect thing for that curiosity and has that sort of mindset. But because we have the bar set really high, we're missing out on those potential candidates. And I think it's a matter of refining it and fine-tuning that sort of job rec and some of the questions that we ask and the process overall. And you have to keep trying new techniques and new things every now and then. You can't just say, yep, this is the same questionnaire that we used 3 years ago. No, we can't use the same boilerplate questions. Things evolve, the company evolves, the role evolves. So you kind of have to go with it. And try to understand the different changes that happen through that process. So.
Yeah, and the industry evolves, the attacks evolve, everything evolves. So yeah, it's great that you mentioned that you can't have just such a huge list of requirements that you're narrowing your candidate pool to just a small handful of people before you even talk to somebody to be able to assess their soft skills and all those things that we mentioned before. How do you, I guess, narrow down what's actually going to be on the job description that you hand to that recruiter to say, look, they need to baseline have these things, and here's my short list. How do you determine what's on that?
Yeah, usually you would want to take a look at the baseline for your entire team, right? So if, let's say, for example, we're hiring for a principal consultant, what would a principal consultant look like here at Mox 5? So let's take a look at those examples. Understand what their qualifications are, what their skills are, and then mimic those for what the job rec is going to look like. Now, granted, there are going to be changes to it at the end of the day, and you have to continuously make these edits, as I mentioned before, right? Even if you go with that job rec and you get a bunch of candidates, maybe let's refine that a little bit more. Or you maybe don't get enough candidates. You might have to loosen up the requirements a little bit further to get more candidates coming in, right? And I think it's a matter of what's the expectation? Who are you looking to get in this role? And what better than looking at your own team, right? If you look at your team and you know that this team has, these sorts of expertise and they're good at this, they're good at that, let's try to mimic these behaviors and that we want in this sort of principal consultant and then apply it towards that role that we're looking for.
You make a great point about constantly revisiting what it is that you're looking for and adjusting based on the number of candidates that you're getting. That's one thing most companies just do so poorly, in my experience, at least as an external recruiter. I'll basically get a job description. They're like, all right, go find this person. And, if I'm lucky, we'll get an hour to talk about why the company's great and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, the requirements are usually extremely inflexible. Regardless of how big the candidate pool is. I mean, I've worked on jobs before where there were 5 people in the entire United States that met those requirements. And I would tell the hiring manager, look, our candidate pool is 5 people. If you, knowing that recruiting is a numbers game, we could reach out to all 5. We might get one response, but the chance that person is going to be interested, accept an offer, get all the way through the process is extremely low. So at the end of the day, you have to broaden the candidate pool somehow.
Yeah.
So, as a hiring manager, if you can work with your recruiter and ask them, hey, what are you finding based on what I've just given you? And they can tell you the size of the candidate pool. That's a great way to adjust early on, so they're not beating their head against the wall for 3 weeks trying to find somebody that doesn't exist. That's the thing about unicorns; they don't exist. So, I always say that. Well, we're coming up on time here, Jeff. So, just one last question for you: is there anything we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
I think when it comes to hiring is work closely with your recruiting team, kind of following along the same lines that we just talked earlier. Oftentimes, people overlook really great candidates that may not have the right certificates, that may not have the sort of years of experience, but they're really good, talented individuals. And sometimes it's tough, and I get it, with lack of time to be able to interview folks, or not knowing how low to drop the baseline to, for lack of a better term. But I think you got to start looking at working closely with your recruiting team and make sure that you can start expanding the reach a little bit broader out. There's an exceptional amount of talented folks that are out there that have zero certs. And granted, I came from this sort of space where I ended up getting my master's and so on and all these things. But candidly, I don't believe in any of the certificates. I don't believe in any sort of, having a specific master's degree or college degree or what have you. There's an incredible amount of talented people that may not even have any degrees whatsoever, but are really sharp and know what they do, and are really good, let's say, forensic analysts or SOC analysts or what have you, that oftentimes we overlook by setting those requirements. And I think it's, don't look at what's on paper. Obviously, there's minimum requirements that you need, and I get it. But try to look at what's not there, that sometimes you oftentimes overlook, which is the will, the passion, the drive, the hunger, the desire to be in security, the willingness to learn and grow are extremely, extremely important, especially as you start building your.
Absolutely, yeah. And just really focus on hiring for potential versus, the letters behind somebody's name or, some sort of credentials, because I think often talent and credentials don't necessarily, it's not that they're opposed to each other, but somebody who's extremely talented and has a ceiling. It's
indirectly related.
Yeah, exactly. There's no direct correlation there. So, keep an open mind, broaden your candidate pool, and talk to people. I think that's a good way to sum it up. So, great episode. Appreciate your time, Jeff. If people want to keep up with the work that you do, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, they can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can message me or add me on LinkedIn, and more than happy to talk about any sort of opportunities that we have here at Mox 5, or even if you want to grab a coffee or something like that, I'm also more than happy.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Jeff, and thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Pete.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.